Grind or die.
Disclaimer: I am not an expert. The following show will have strong language. The views and opinions in this program are solely for entertainment purposes. This show is intended for adults. Guardian discretion is strongly advised. Hello, and welcome to the Angibo Show. This is the second episode. If you caught the first, please let me apologize in the dead air, the amount of uhs and ums. I'm going to be doing my best to reduce those in real time. Today's topic is going to be a video game series called Metal Gear. I will be discussing each sequel. I will be also going over the year of its release, filler games that either coincide with the story or branched off to try and do something new. The primary purpose of this is this gaming company called Konami is going to be releasing a quote-unquote remix to a video game that was actually dropped in 2005, I believe. That particular game, I believe, has already had one or two updates. So again, I'm going to be starting at the beginning. The very first game that was released was Metal Gear. This came out in 1987 on the Nintendo system and was originally produced for a console called the MSX2, which I believe was more prevalent in Asia, Europe, as well as South America. I'll be going more in depth in the actual games that I started, but because of the goal of this episode, kind of just ranting on the newest game coming out called Metal Gear Solid Delta, I just wanted to again go through their portfolio and kind of share my thoughts and anything else with that. So following Metal Gear, released in 1987, there was the Snake's Revenge, which was released in 1990, again on the Nintendo in the United States and the MSX2 elsewhere. After Snake's Revenge was Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake. I believe that was also released in 1990. I don't know if Snake's Revenge and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake were either hand-in-hand released at the same time, or if there was release differences within the different countries, because sometimes Japanese production teams, manufacturers, they'll release a product or software or something of that nature first, get all the data analytics, all that jazz, also work out any bugs before they release it to other countries. And Metal Gear Solid, after Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, was released on the PlayStation in 1998. And this was actually the first game that I had played out of the series. I was actually playing it over at my aunt and uncle's. They had just gotten rid of their Super Nintendo, and they had just bought a PlayStation. So when I would visit them, I would be able to play that for a little bit, sometimes after meals, whatever. And Metal Gear Solid was, in my opinion, ahead of its time. The story, the artwork, and even the gaming functionality was, I wouldn't say new or doing anything different, but it was just captivating. It's a stealth game, so you're this soldier who isn't really affiliated with any kind of branch of military going to Alaska to disarm this weapon of mass destruction. Those are kind of just the highlights. So after really digging that video game, Metal Gear Solid, was paying a little more attention to any of the following releases, and about 4 years later, in 2002, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty released on the PlayStation 2. This had updated graphics, obviously, with a new console. There were updated gaming mechanics. The original Metal Gear Solid was a third-person, almost, not third-person, it was a bird's-eye view video game. So a lot like Zelda and other video games of that sort. After Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty released, the following game, called Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater for PlayStation 2, that was released in 2005, and instead of following the story chronologically, it actually does a Quentin Tarantino turn, and it gives you a prelogue into the story that you've already started to play if you followed the series from 1987 till now. And this game in particular is the one that this is really focused on. After Metal Gear Solid 3, released in 2005, Metal Gear Solid 4 released on the PlayStation 3, and it was released in 2008. This installment actually followed the events in Metal Gear Solid 2. So as I said, Metal Gear Solid 3, it did a Quentin Tarantino. It gave you a prequel to what was going on. Metal Gear Solid 4 was the continuation of Metal Gear Solid 2. After Metal Gear Solid 4 was dropped, they then dropped Metal Gear Solid 5, Phantom Pain, in 2015 for, I believe, the PS4 and Xbox, and also possibly the PC. Then they released Metal Gear Survive on the same consoles, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox, in 2018. And in my opinion, that tanked. It had absolutely no coverage of the character that you were following, or the band of characters you followed in the previous titles. And I believe it was more so to be played online. Now, what I'm about to mention are the games that continued the story either on consoles or portable devices, such as the PlayStation Portable, or PSP. There was Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. This particular one was not created by the original developer, Hideo Kojima. Then there was Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. This actually continued the story after Metal Gear Solid 3, so you're still in the same time period, and you're roughly in the Cold War era, so between 1960 and 1970 is the background for the video game. And then there was Metal Gear Rising, and this actually follows the co-character of Metal Gear Solid 2. The remakes and non-essentials to the story are Metal Gear Solid 5, Ground Zero, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. That particular game was actually a remake of the original Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation. Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes was released for the GameCube solely, which I was kind of distraught over because I was a Sony fan for quite some time. So anybody that had a GameCube, I'd always ask them, hey, do you have Twin Snakes? Do you have Metal Gear Solid? Anything? Nothing? Okay. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Metal Gear Acid and Metal Gear Acid 2, I don't believe they're essential to the story of the series. It was actually card turn-based video games to where you would collect trading cards that either had new weaponry, new characters that you could either play as or just collect. I'm not terribly familiar with those. But to focus more so on the game that Konami is releasing soon, Metal Gear Solid Delta, in my opinion, I feel as if this is a money grab. I was doing a little bit of research on the original Metal Gear Solid 3 and came across some notes stating how I believe it took $80 million to develop, produce, and to just hit the market. Now, I don't know what their cost is now, but from what I gather by people that are reviewing this before it even drops, is they are just updating the graphics, upgrading some of the mechanical functions of the in-game functionality. So to get into the thick of it, Metal Gear Solid 3, following Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, in Snake Eater, you actually get to camouflage yourself in real time. They have different camos to select from, so you might go from a red brick background in some kind of warehouse district to more of a forest backdrop. And anything in between, there some water camos to where it's light blues and grays, and they gave a percentage of how well you were hidden, which differed tremendously from the previous games. Not to mention, the other great thing that came out of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater was their theme song by Cynthia Harrell called Snake Eater. It is by far one of the greatest songs I've ever heard attached to a video game. I think they also use it quite artfully within the actual play mode of the game. There's a sequence playing the theme song at the beginning, at the end of the video game, and a ladder sequence where you're actually climbing for maybe a minute and a half if you don't let go of the joystick. And throughout that time you're climbing the ladder, you're hearing the theme song by Cynthia during that whole time. So I don't want to knock it too badly. Again, the original release was great for its time. Hideo Kojima is by far one of my favorite game developers, game directors, or just director in general. He's a wonderful visionary. But again, with very little new features being added as far as maybe developing the story a little bit more, it's not compelling to myself. Also, I do just kind of want to have this PSA moment, a public service announcement, to try and have people save money, to not possibly drop $60 to $70 for a game that already had its skeleton and flesh from the PS2. It's awesome that Konami's still trying to keep Metal Gear Solid alive without its main contributor, Hideo Kojima, who, by the way, I would love to interview. I don't think I'm there yet, but again, huge fascination around Death Stranding. I haven't played that series yet, but maybe I will get to it one of these days. And kind of mentioning a little bit more about their remakes is doing this research. I think for Metal Gear Solid 3, just by itself, it had 2 different iterations made, which, looking back, and especially now with what I'm discussing is like they're essentially just copy and pasting every couple of years and remaking something, and it feels not necessarily wrong, but at the same time, if they're trying to get a new audience, or if this is Konami's way of writing a love letter to Hideo Kojima to bring him back, I guess that's a different story altogether. But background on that is, during the development and the release of Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain in 2015, I believe it was shortly after the game was pushed to market, Hideo Kojima had left. I was unable to find exactly why. I don't know if Konami and Hideo had differing opinions, if there was anything weird going on in the background, but Konami apparently did state that they just ended his contract. But the biggest pet peeve I have with Metal Gear Solid 5 is they released an unfinished game. So I've progressed pretty much as far as I can within it without completing everything 100%, if you will. There's, I believe, one mission that actually finalizes the game that was left out. So I think if you were to buy Metal Gear Solid 5 today, Phantom Pain, not Ground Zero, which will be another talking point here soon, Phantom Pain has 50 playable missions, and I believe, even from YouTubing some stuff, there's a rough draft of the 51st mission, which would have kind of tied up one or two loose ends, so I'm really just nitpicking. But to Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zero, this was kind of, I guess, a red flag that would have maybe paved the way for Metal Gear Solid Delta. So Ground Zero, or MGS-V Ground Zero, was at the time sold at, I believe, $29.99 on the PlayStation Marketplace. I don't know if it sold anywhere else for a differing price, or if the actual physical copy was cheaper or equivalent to what I paid for it. And essentially what Ground Zeroes is a single mission, one very narrow map to kind of explore with very limited objectives. So essentially what you bought was just a demo, which anyone who grew up playing the PlayStation 2 when it was in its prime, there was a PlayStation magazine that would, I believe, insert playable demos for a variety of video games, and the amount that you could probably play on those demos was about the equivalent to what Ground Zero was for sale. So Konami is kind of muddying the water. If anybody else is really paying attention to just what Konami is doing, and seeing how creative and free Hideo Kojima has been since then, and I really do hope he is. I hope he's doing well. Again, he's a fantastic artist, a wonderful visionary. I would also have to say there's a article written for PC Gamer by a Joshua Wolins. They alluded to not many huge changes happening in Metal Gear Solid Delta. They do, however, mention that the graphics, the mechanics, the game engine that it's built on, everything's upgraded, which, cool. Whatever. But again, I fell in love with this game series from Metal Gear Solid that was produced in 1998 on the PlayStation. And even that particular game had what I would call fillers. So they then released Metal Gear Solid VR missions, and then they released another Metal Gear Solid Integral, which I believe was the full game and the VR missions, or the virtual reality missions, where it kind of gives a background to how the main protagonist was trained, or something of that nature. Side note, I'm realizing how many times I'm saying and I'm really trying to watch that, especially after the first episode, because that was a little cringy. Excuse the stretch. But that is really all I had. Again, if anybody else out there is a Metal Gear Solid fan, I'd love to hear your remarks, any comments that you may have. But yeah, if you're curious about the theme song that I mentioned earlier, again, it's Snake Eater by Cynthia Harrell. Wonderful song, very retro, almost. I've read remarks that it's like a James Bond theme song, which I think is spot on. Wonderful composition. Cynthia's voice is wonderful. I don't think anybody else could do what she did with that song. And again, the storyline for Metal Gear Solid 3, it was wonderful for its time. It's a Cold War piece. And I highly recommend, if you have not played any of these games, start from Metal Gear Solid 1. You can probably find remade or remastered versions for whatever console or PC, depending upon what your poison is, if you will. But as this is wrapping up, I just want to say thank you again for tuning in. I hope wherever you are, you're doing all right. Stay up, stay safe, and use your turn signal.
Grind or die.